So welcome to running effective and engaging meetings, which is our Skillshare this evening. My name is Balla, and I'm the training and support lead at Transition Together. And we're absolutely delighted to have with us this evening three wonderful people from three really exciting transition groups. We've got Jeff Baldwin from Transition Chepstow. We've got Bex Baxter from Coexist in Bristol, and Guy Erlacher-Downing from Transition Town Totnes. And all of them will be sharing little pieces of their wisdom and tools and top tips for hosting effective and engaging meetings. We know that they can be very difficult things, meetings. They can really be the bane of our lives and sap all the energy out of any good project. They can be cumbersome and they can be combative. They can also be really enthralling and nurturing and enlivening. And that's what we hope for, because we want our meetings to nurture our groups and nurture the projects and the work that we're doing in our communities and nurture ourselves. It's all part of the transition model. So it'd be really lovely to kind of get people's experience and insights that we can share to others. We're going to dive in. And we host Skillshares because we really believe that within the transition movement, like all movements and all organizations, we build up a lot of knowledge, we build up skills, we build up experience, and that is really like the gold dust. It's the stuff that brings everything to life. It kind of it enables us to do things that are really difficult, gives us that resilience. And it can be shared, it can be cascaded through our organizations, through our groups, through our communities, and through the movement as a whole, so that we can be more efficient, more effective, more resilient, more dynamic. And we're not having to reinvent the wheel constantly. And we really believe in the transition movement, that in that non-hierarchical intelligence, in that kind of horizontalness. And so everybody has something to offer. Everybody has their own unique perspective. Everybody has their experience. And so that's what we want to find out, because that's the richness and diversity of it all. So Skillshares are really a platform to bring all of that together and to dive into a particular area and give our focus and attention to it. Now, as I mentioned in my intro, meetings can be really tricky, and they can be the things that put a lot of people off groups. And a lot of people might drop out because meetings get too laborious, too conversational, less kind of efficient and effective, and focused on all of the nuances rather than the doing. So we need to find ways to make sure that we keep them alive and that we keep people's attention and their spirits up and engaged throughout those meetings. So that's the subject matter of today's Skillshare. How we can run effective and engaging meetings. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our first speaker, Guy from Transition Town Totnes. Transition Town Totnes is one of the oldest and longest going transition groups. I will hear a little bit more about the group from Guy in a moment. But just to kind of say, Guy is the Transition Town Totnes coordinator, as far as I know. Is that right, Guy? Brilliant. Well, over to you.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you all for having me. I'll share my screen if that seems best, so you can see. Cool. So you can see some rough slides I've made. Can everyone see a black square at the moment? That should now be groovy. Okay, I'm getting some waves. Nice. Yes, so as you know, I'm Guy.
Still says loading. It might just need to be exited and entered again. Sometimes I found that Zoom has been playing tricks on us like this.
Exited and say again, sorry?
Yes, if you stop presenting or stop sharing and then re-present again, you might have more luck.
Okay. Let me know how that works. Is that better? Yes. Okay, cool. Do prod me if it has any issues. So yes, so my role is officially as coordinator. I've been doing this role for about 2 years now, and previously was engaged as a volunteer in multiple different things. Uh, Here are some of the projects that it's a bit dated, this image, but these are some of the projects we've got going. Um, Everything from the Totnes Climate Hub, which is our, as some of you might have, uh, climate emergency response centers or climate hubs in your areas. We started this one in 2022, and we've been open 4 days a week ever since then, which has really been brilliant as a public presence and a way to run events and skill shares, etc. It's been one of our most exciting recent bits of work. We also run Incredible Edible, which are public growing spaces in and around the town. And we're looking to broaden that this year into more themes of nature recovery, looking at how we can take on themes of biodiversity gain and reaching 30 by 30 targets, which you might be aware of. And then we do some of these other wonderful things which are on our Transition Town Totnes website. So do check that out if you'd like to find out a bit more about the sorts of things we do. So yes, so that's me on the left doing one of our transition tours with the wonderful Hal. And I'm also where I live is an off-grid community called Land Matters, and we're a cooperative. And so we also think a bit about decision making and effective group processes, and we run by decision making process called consensus. So I might, depending how I talk and what comes to mind, I might drip feed some things from that as well, and how we do things a bit differently there to TTT Transition Town Totnes, just in case I use that. So I'd like to speak about two things. I think breaking it down into what feels useful for me to input on this. One part being about practicalities, and the second bit being about the culture, like the culture of work, culture of our meetings, culture of groups. So regarding holding meetings, the practicalities that I would advise from our experience are things like consistency of meetings. I think it's good to have them consistent. You need to have meetings consistent enough to keep energy going, to keep things productive, but not so consistent as they become burdensome. So an example of differences are our core group meeting, which is where a member of each project comes together and we make strategic decisions about the organization. We do that monthly, whereas because that sort of fits with the different timescales of people who have things to do, and we want to not make it too intense on projects to have to come to. And then some projects like the Climate Hub that I mentioned, they have meetings every fortnight because there's a lot of things that need deciding on, a lot of things that they want to make sure people have input on from their different working groups. That used to be every week in the first few months of getting started, just because things needed to move. But then we made the realization that as people needed a bit more space and there wasn't so much intense decision making, that we could give a bit more breathing room. And that's part of us, especially when so many people are volunteers, they're giving volunteer time. You want to respect that. You want to make sure that you're not overstretching people. And that comes into also a point about length. My feeling is a meeting longer than 2 hours and I shut off, other people shut off, unless you're making a meeting that has a nice big break in it, or something that keeps it alive, or has some sort of get up and dance or whatever. So something in between. Longer than 2 hours is a bit too far. Shorter than an hour, and you run the risk of knowing that things that do overrun, and then you need to make sure you've got a good timekeeper. About agendas, I'd say one nice trick that I like is keeping short agenda items at the start and keeping the longer stuff sort of secondary. It's nice to start a meeting and have short, snappy things to get out the way. Some things that are often like just need reporting back on, that are often positive, positive things that have happened. And it feels nice to have got that. You already feel like you've had a few wins in the first 15 minutes of a meeting, and reminds you why you're there. One thing I make sure we do is we send out as much as possible, send out agendas ahead of time. So you're expecting that a lot of people, myself included, really need to know what's going to be discussed before I get there. I find it a bit tricky to discuss things in the moment that I haven't had a bit of time to know what's coming. And on that note, when I put out agendas, when I try and help advise other people to make sure that agenda items are noted what you're trying to get to. So we mark this down as report, explore, decide. So a report item, is something that takes a couple minutes. Maybe it's you went to get a quote from someone for something, and then you're bringing that back to the meeting. You're just reporting it. That's the job. Explore being that you don't need to make a decision on this, but you just want to make a bit of time, some breathing room to get other people's opinions on something. So that could be like discussing the logo for your organization or a project or something that you don't need to get to an endpoint, but you want to make space for. And then decide is fairly clear. You want to make sure that people know that by the end of the meeting, you'd like to have a decision on this. Maybe there's a time urgency to it. And if people know that ahead of time, then it helps just get people acknowledging what that's going to be. Yes, and so around like decision making, we run things by consensus, and we do the same at land matters. I think there's merit also to consent-based decision making, and I'm not too privy in the field of being able to talk too much on the differences, but a process where that when a proposal is brought, going round with everyone and seeing if there's any clarifications needed and giving everyone a chance to speak because they might not have until then, and then lastly going round the room with any objections, and then if there are, then a new proposal needs to be brought on the decision with amendments made based on those clarifications, until a conclusion is reached that at least meets or allows people to abstain to move something forward. Some groups I found went earlier on try working with hand signals. These are things that, especially if you're in a larger group and the facilitator needs to be aware of quite a few people at once, having different hand signals that either mean that you're trying to raise a point, or you're trying to ask a clarification, or so I don't want to go too much into details, but raising a point would be raising a finger. For example, asking for a clarification from someone could be raising up a C shape. Asking about a technicality would be raising like a T shape. We don't often do these, to be honest, in our core group meetings, based on size and need, but that's always something to be aware of. And just a thing I find interesting, especially if you're developing into a larger group, ways of managing multiple threads at once. Either establishing a group chat of, where things can be mentioned outside of the meeting spaces, as long as it is clear what that chat is there to do. And there's also a service that we use at Land Matters is called Lumio, which is a free-ish. I don't actually know about the cost, to be honest. Don't come back to me if there's a cost. Which is a way of having different points open at once where people can communicate about something that needs deciding on or just needs discussing. And you can put votes on that with it, at the same time. We moved to that at Land Matters during COVID when we had less in-person meetings, obviously, and we found it's a really beneficial way of keeping decision-making processes ongoing when there aren't the meetings to hold that. And it's also a useful resource to be able to look back on what's been discussed because it's in writing. And yeah, it's a nice way of being able to decide things if decisions need to happen quickly, but can't wait until the next meeting in 2 weeks or a month. It's got its issues as well, but that's something to be aware of. And just on the practicalities, thing I find beneficial to raise is being clear on roles as much as possible, establishing people's roles within the group, and knowing when they can be brought in. And then there's also to be aware of the roles that you hold in the meeting. So in Transition Town Totnes, we hold a facilitator, a minute keeper to make sure that that role isn't falling on the facilitator themselves, a timekeeper, and a role which we call the keeper of the heart, which is someone whose role is to observe the needs of the meeting and make sure that people are feeling heard and that we're basically keeping it as a safe space. And which leads me into talking a bit about culture. And the thing that I think is beautiful about transition, as a bit about what Danny was saying, is, I mean, just take notes from how Danny's held us so far about making people feel comfortable and welcome in the meeting spaces. So starting meetings, we also have check-ins, which is just a way like Danny's done just now of getting people to say a bit about where they're coming from. It allows us to build a bit of more of a relationship with who's in the room and a bit of understanding of if people are coming with heaviness or have had a long day, so you just might need to be aware that they have things going on that might make them a bit edgy. And yeah, and the keep of the heart, the thing to remember, if it's a new thing to you, it's, if you imagine a facilitator's role is to get the outcomes of the meeting, to get the decisions made, and to get people to have worked things through within the time that you have. The keeper of the heart is not focused on that. The focus of the keeper of the heart is to make sure that a respectful space is being held, and that people feel welcome and safe. And yeah, that comes down to, so Claire Milne, who works with this organization called Starter Culture and worked with Transition Network, has said some brilliant things about this, about fundamentally building trust is sort of fundamental to having healthy groups and keeping them efficient, which there are different ways of trying to establish trust and respect among the people in your cohort. Now, that can be through practical things like check-ins and having a keeper of the heart. It can be through establishing a group agreement at the start or in the early stages of forming your group. A nice thing I find as well is if you have a vision statement or something like that, or a mission or whatever you've got that's you've communally agreed on is what you're trying to do, having someone read that, either just read that occasionally, remind you back to what you're trying to do, can be a nice resetting moment. Yeah, and just on this point about culture, if you imagine there's the outer work, the practical stuff that we're doing, the actions, and the inner being the sort of the well-being of ourselves, the nurturing ourselves as activists at the same time. the sort of peak or peak outer is the being at an event, writing a funding application, the action, and sort of the peak inner is something like meditation or whatever it is your well-being practice. The nice thing I find about transition meetings is trying to meet in the middle of that Venn diagram where we're working to actions, but we're respecting and celebrating and caring for each other at the same time. I don't know if I think Naomi Klein said about transition at one point that if the brilliant thing about especially in a transition is that if you're trying to break people's worldview, then you need to be around to pick up the pieces. And I think finding ways to do that in meetings of keeping things positive and progressive is brilliant and what we should strive to do. So yes, if you haven't heard of, also, as I've written there, yes, and it's a nice mentality to have and encourage people to do. If you're bringing something that's a point to, if someone's bringing something in discussion and you would like to build upon it, or you'd like to raise something that's a bit difficult, think more. I mean, it's fairly simple practice, but think less of yes, but, and more of yes, and, as in yes, and we could plan this a bit. We could also consider this, etc. Just slightly shifts our perception about meetings and how we relate to one another. Yeah, and on that point, on the point of building trust, some organizations which I'd like to point people to, one being Navigate, which do some wonderful work around conflict. If we're also exploring when things do get difficult, they run trainings about how to engage and what emotionally triggers us in conflict, and noticing that conflict isn't something, it's not always the thing which is external and a shouting match. Conflict is the internal difference of opinion, which, if unnoticed, can bubble up into those other things which we normally refer to as conflict. And they do a brilliant thing about trying to help people identify what are the mainstreams and margins of your group. And so, for example, with where I live at Land Matters, I'm one of the younger members, and I've also not lived there nearly as long as most other people there. And so there's a mainstream of having experience of living there a while and using jargon that has been established, calling things by what they used to be called 10 years ago. And I'm on the margin of that, of not understanding what those things are. So once you just draw attention to that, that can be useful to understand what the needs are of different people. So in that case, that meant that trying to encourage people to do some jargon busting. Sorry, yes, Danny, am I over time?
Just letting you know, you've got about a minute left.
Okay, cool. Okay. And so just some things to flag, which we do with our Transition Streets group, which is where we invite people to go into each other's home, which can be a pretty energetic, possibly difficult situation. We give advice at the start of things to be aware of when looking at how to be an inclusive group, and that includes looking at overcoming physical issues of the people you'll be working with, language and jargon busting. So looking at what terminology might not everyone know, the costs and timing. So that comes into account when you're picking a space for a meeting, making sure that it's cost effective and the timing fits to people that may have kids or etc. Being aware of things like gender identity, multiculturalism, ability and disability. One resource that's great to point that I like to point people to is the Eden Project. They do this thing called like the Big Eat or the Big Festival. I forget it. But if you type in Eden Project communities, they have an inclusive communities guide, which which is a really useful tool on looking at how to keep inclusive. If you don't really know how to embody inclusive thinking into your workplace, that's a useful tool. Yeah, and the other organization is Rad HR. So if you're looking at professional HR advice, but you don't have the money to seek professional HR advice, Rad HR is something that we've used before. They're especially attuned to the needs of small charities, small organizations. So whether that's developing a policy or just providing a bit of advice, I've gone to them before for colleagues' needs, and they're particularly great to check out. And yes, that's me. Hope that was
fantastic. Thank you, Guy. Very thorough and in-depth kind of look at how you cultivate that engagement, and you paid a lot of attention to the safety and the inclusivity of groups, which was really interesting to hear about. Some really amazing suggestions in there. I'm going to come back to you on a few things after we've heard from everybody. So I've got some questions from what you shared, which I'll keep on the back burner for now. But thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. Thanks for stepping in there, Jeff. Over to you.
Well, yeah, thank you. Particularly to Guy, I've been trying to rewrite my my notes as I was going through yours, so I'm not labouring too many of the same points. So do excuse me, because I've got several pieces of paper here. I'm not going to be bringing any visual aids or slides up, so please bear with me while I just talk through some of my thoughts. Really, I started off thinking, okay, how do you make an effective meeting? And I started writing some notes about this, and then I realized what I'm doing here is really around a more of a formal kind of business like meeting, and realize that is only one type of meeting, but nevertheless that's one I started with. It's probably the kind that many of us who are familiar with. So I'll come on some of the other points, some of the other types of meetings as we go. But first of all, for what we might call a formal or a business type meeting, the kind of thing that some of our transition groups might have regularly, might have sort of regular monthly check-in meetings, might have an annual AGM, which my group, Transition Chepstow, had only last night, and Danny kindly came along and was our guest speaker. It went well, but that's the sort of meeting that has a chair, a formal chair, and there are a few other roles in formal meetings. If you've got enough people, everyone can have a job in the meeting, really. But essentially the roles are, someone needs to chair it, someone needs to really organize and bring it along. Ideally you'll have somebody who might call a clerk or an administrator, so the person who sort of work in the background, help things run smoothly. For some bigger meetings, and particularly the more contentious ones, you might want to bring in a facilitator. I think that's something that the guy mentioned as well. I've had some experience of good facilitators. A good facilitator can be really helpful, particularly for those more sort of emotionally fraught meetings, to help bring out people's ideas and to work with the chair, if you like, to help keep things on track. I think it's really important to have someone taking notes, and that probably shouldn't be the chair, because their job is to keep their eyes on the room and keep the thing moving. It could be the clerk if you're lucky enough to have one, or it could just be someone who doesn't necessarily have another job, but it really is an important role of keeping your eye on what's going on in the meeting, noting the important points. It's not about writing down everything everybody said. So somebody who's perhaps got that eye for detail and who understands the topics quite usually would be great for a note taker. For these sort of regular meetings or AGM type meetings, there are probably individuals who have a lead on certain topics, whether there'll be initiatives that the group's running, or roles like treasurer, of which I am now the new treasurer of Transition Chepstow as of last night. What that means, I'm not entirely sure, but I'll be finding out over the next few days. But yeah, there are those formal reports from the topic leads. Those topic leads, they can they're generally enthusiasts, and they can be enthusiastic and talk in quite a lot of detail about their particular topic. So I think it's important that the chair sets out at the beginning that essentially what we need from the topic leads is a short summary of things they've done, things they've planned or are planning, and any specific issues that needs to be brought up the group. Yeah, just mentioning that, back to the role of the chair. Who should you choose for that? Typically, it goes to the most senior person, the boss, if you like. That it isn't necessarily the right person for it. And I found certainly in work meetings, if you've got someone on your team who is good at chairing meetings, get them to chair the meeting. Particularly if they enjoy it. And some people, believe it or not, really do enjoy chairing meetings. Something else about, one of the roles of a note taker is to take notes that can be used to give a summary of the meeting afterwards. What I hope you agree, don't want to see is a long document at the end detailing exactly what everybody said and who said what and to whom. But the idea of the notes is to record the key features that came out of it. So things like actions, things that you've agreed that you're going to do, and decisions that will be important for the future. Depending on the type of meeting, number of people there as well, the note taker can have a good add value to the meeting by bringing particular topics up, issues up. For instance, on if we're in a room on a whiteboard or a blackboard or a flip chart, if we're working in remote meetings on like we're doing now, having a separate kind of whiteboard, electronic whiteboard, can be quite helpful for recording issues, particularly things that you don't necessarily have time to cover in the meeting, but to make sure that they are recognized and recorded. And I think that's part of the chair's role as well, to make sure that people at the meeting are given an opportunity to speak and to try to bring out or reveal the what's behind anything that's concerning them, or anything that they really need to bring up at the time. Then to make sure that those issues are at least recorded and recognized, even if they can't be resolved at that meeting. So I think I've talked quite a bit about these more formal types of meetings, such as groups need to have for to keep in touch with each other and keep in touch with keep the communications going. There's another kind of meeting that is still formal, but it is quite different. It's one that my group have been trying to organise for some time. Is a public meeting where it's inviting members of the public to come along and discuss, or to hear about some of the things that your group's doing, or some of the issues or issues that you believe need to be discussed in the community. Again, I think you need a chair for that, someone to make sure that people are given an opportunity to speak, but don't take up all the time, and to perhaps encourage the quieter ones to speak up, speak their mind a bit more. Again, really important to have a note taker, and ideally one who can visualize, bring them up bring up key points so that the audience can see that they are being taken seriously. I've been to some public meetings where there's lots of discussion and then it closes at 9 o'clock and everybody goes away, and you think, well, what happens? You know, what's going to happen next? So it's really important, I think, to follow up with a bit of a summary of what happened at the meeting, who was there, some of the points were discussed, and a way forward. You know, what's going to happen next? What was agreed and what wasn't agreed, and how are we going to move on? The next, moving off these more formal type meetings, even if you're having a informal meeting for whatever purpose, I still think it's important to for the participants to have the clear idea of what it is, what they're there for. So one of the again, these informal meetings, there may be no need for an agenda, but certainly a topic, you know, a title for the meeting of this is what we're getting together for, enables people to come along having put some thought into it. One of the questions about, if you generally want a meeting to be informal, it probably doesn't help to hold it in a formal space, like in your the main meeting room of in the council chambers. Can be quite intimidating. So I've been thinking about where we might use for the more of these informal meetings. Obviously, down the pub is the usual one. I favour that, but not everybody wants to meet in a pub. Particularly people who don't drink might just find it not really conducive environment for them. So I think it's important when particularly for the informal meetings, to choose a space that people feel comfortable in. Those were the sort of three main types of meeting that I've been thinking about lately. Is these sort of general business-like meetings, the formal public meetings, and very much informal meetings. Oh yeah, and another location for having an informal meeting, which I'm planning at the moment, is to have a walk-in meeting. I did one a few weeks ago with some local council officers. And rather than sitting down in a space with documents in front of us, we walked around the town and looked at some of the issues around the town. It revealed a lot. I learned a lot, and I think they did as well. So just to sum up, if I can find my sum up piece, there it is. I'm a big fan of asking questions when you go, before you start doing anything. Ask yourself questions. To reveal, to help you reveal reasons you're doing it, and that should help you then plan things a bit better. And one of the things about planned effective meetings, I think the first question you really need to get your head around is not what it is for, what I want from it, where it should be, but it's who is going to be involved, who's the audience, who are the leads or the speakers. And to give some thought to, particularly for the audience, if you like, the people who are there being presented to or listening, what sorts of people are they? You know, you might know them as individuals, and that's good to think about who's going to be there and what was the last discussion we had with them, and what are their interests. Bigger meetings, you might have no idea who's going to be there, but again, it's worth thinking what types of people are they going to be? Members of our group? Are they people who've had some contact with our groups, at least know what we're about, or are they literally people off the streets, residents, for instance, who may really not know anything about the backgrounds of your group? Okay, so really think about your audience, who's listening and who's presenting, who's leading, and the various other questions about, you know, why are you having this meeting? That's perhaps the first thing. Why am I asking you here? What's it for, and why are we doing it now? Again, I think it's really important to think about the type of meeting. Traditionally, you might have a meeting in a meeting room. You might sit down on the grass. That's my favourite type of meeting, as long as there's not wet grass. Sit in a circle around the grass, as long as there's not 100 people. That might make a circle type meeting difficult. But again, depends on the type of meeting, the type of people there, number of people are there. And of course, many meetings now are held online, like we're doing now. There's a whole, I think we could have another whole session on online meetings, because they do operate, they inevitably operate differently. Not necessarily worse, not necessarily better than the more traditional face-to-face meetings. Finally, my group have been trying to plan a public meeting for more than a year now, and the biggest question we've had is, when are we going to do it? We know what we want to do, we know who we want to be there, we know why we want to do it. When has been the hardest question, and every time we choose a date, something happens. And guess what? Now we had an election called, so our planned meeting may now be turned into a hustings, which will be very different from the meeting we planned. So there you are. I think that's it. Whatever type of meeting you think you're having, it's really important to think about who it's for, what it's for, and what you're going to do with the after the meeting.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I love those points. I think that it's very, very easy to overlook. Sometimes we can go on automatic pilot, and that's when things get a bit bumpy. But that you really kind of like lit it up and kind of illuminated this point around really asking ourselves, who it's for, what the purpose is, what do they want out from the meeting. It's not about us necessarily. It serves a function. So thank you so much for that. I have questions, and also a couple of things that I want to highlight a bit more from what you said. I really find it really interesting as well, the difference in the types of meetings that you're talking about in comparison to maybe what some of the guys' meetings were talking about as well. And that really shows the kind of the need for diversity and like you said, knowing your audience and knowing your participants and fellow team members. But finally, we're going to pass over to Bex. Bex and I used to work for Coexist together, and recently we've sort of both, I guess, been involved in a Coexist project, the Bristol Commons. And when I first joined Coexist, Bex was the people development manager. And it was amazing to see how an organization and a group was dedicated in really holding spaces really well. And it's one thing that I really valued, is that care that goes into making sure that people feel safe, people feel nurtured, and people feel able to be themselves. So I think a lot of the things that Coexist as a group now does comes from some of the work that Bex brought in nice and early. And it is an organization that learns and uses the new tools that it's given and changes with time as well. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on things, Bex.
Yeah, thank you. I'm ready now, everybody.
Go for
it. Okay, great. So yeah, like Danny was saying, originally from 2009, I got involved with Coexist. So I've been involved on and off in different guises for a really long time. But my role was even emergent. At the time, it was a project that was just, we were creating it as we went along, and it's kind of continued with that infusion of culture. Becoming part of everything that we do, even our documents, our structures, our processes. So my focus really today is going to sort of deepen that a little bit around the culture and how that really enlivens and embodies the way in which we hold meetings and gives meaning back, so cyclically back into what we're doing, and brings alive the core purpose and the principles in which we want to work through, for, and by. So my other hat is that I'm a life coach. So I was already a life coach and already doing a lot of that work, and that started to become very alive within my role as people development manager, and influenced a lot of the systems and the way in which we held meetings as well. And this is some of the team. At one point at Hamilton House, we had about 25 people, and this is where a lot of these meetings really started to embed themselves, the way in which we wanted to work. So the core purpose of Coexist was Coexist co-creates spaces and services that best provide for the communities that surround us. And this core purpose we would very actively use. We would come back to it. So if we were confused about something, we want to make a decision, anybody from the team, from volunteers all the way through to directors, could come back to this to reference how best to make a decision or how to have a conversation. And this lovely quote, Coexist building community principles. Coexist approach and core purpose has enabled the development of a way of working that is rooted in strong values and emergent strategies. What emerged was a way of holding space and a shared language, a way of relating and interacting with each other. So our systems and processes really emerged from a commitment and a responsiveness to the well-being of the people that we worked with and for. So the culture was grown in a very emergent way to support everyone to thrive. And I remember having a conversation at one time with the team where, you know, I expressed that I would love to feel cherished at work. I'm here a lot. I give my heart and soul to it, and I would love that. And initially that was kind of very new and was received with a few giggles, but eventually it became something that everybody started to take on. So I wanted to talk, so if we move to the subjects slide, about preparing for meetings and communications and check-ins and warm-ups as kind of the main two areas. And just starting back at Coexist in Hamilton House, we named our whole team meeting the MMMMM, the Monday Morning Mega Management Meeting. And this was because we wanted to do something that made sure that we were inclusive of everyone within the team. And I would hold sometimes team trainings as part of my role, one of which to allow the team to explore hierarchical systems and flat management systems to help identify who we had in the room and what empowered different members of the team. The results were that we opted for a mix of both, which was actually quite holacratic. So we had kind of a hierarchical and a flat system there, although over time, we're deepening our relationship to decentralizing power more and more so that we become more and more flat. So but at the time, this was what was chosen. Some people found hierarchical systems more empowering because they'd had positive experiences, and others had had negative experiences and much preferred the other. So somehow we found this combined approach. The Monday morning mega management meeting became an essential meeting for the culture of coexistence to deepen, for the community to feel included. This meant we would even rotate reception volunteers to participate in meetings cyclically. So we would cover them to make sure they were in decision-making processes and had the experience of how we worked as a team. Practically, the agenda would then be circulated to the team a week in advance of the meeting to support everyone's capacity. There were so many departments and everybody would be at capacity. So we would try and do things that really looked after people's time. They'd be invited to populate the agenda items in advance of sessions. And where possible, we would want decision-making to be as inclusive as possible with the entire team there at each meetings. And if they couldn't be, then there would be a feed-in process. I think we've got a slide, Danny, with the agenda on it. Yeah, I took a screenshot, so it's kind of cut it off at the top. But what I wanted to go into here was how we in all, similar to what Guy was talking about, it would be information, discussion, decision. So for efficiency and for prioritizing what we were doing, it was so useful to have people populate the agenda with and clarify whether it was information, whether it required discussion and decision. And sometimes that would mean reducing that down to a core team member or a small team that was holding that particular project to make those decisions, and we'd empower them to do that. Moving on to collective brain. Yes, so this is from our principles document, collective brain. We all input and participate to different extents, but more diverse opinions give greater insight, a more detailed perspective on the whole, and generate more connected ideas for moving forward. Solutions are formed through individuals openly offering suggestions to the collective wisdom. We remain open to how our individual contributions might be used by whoever is responsible for decision-making. Those who take on this responsibility approach the process with openness and can always ask what is best for the mutual success of all. So this was a really key core principle for how we looked at ideas and made decisions. In terms of decision making, this felt core to our way of working. We would literally invite people to propose an idea, so we'd all be sat round, or an opinion, but not hold them too tightly. We'd invite them to literally physically drop them on the table and let go and allow the collective wisdom to make a decision for the benefit of the whole. And this felt very empowering and powerful. So moving on to check-ins and warm-ups. So check-ins became a signature piece for Coexist. I think it's much more commonplace now for other organizations, but and the culture of coexistence, it felt necessary for upholding well-being for the community to make sure we really made sure we honored this process. It was always, over a very long period of time, wanted. This would look like giving everyone a minute or two to say what they needed to say to be fully present in the meeting. And that might be something practical, or it might be something quite emotional or personal to them. But it felt really important to say, how are you arriving? What do you need? What support might you need today? And what we saw was that what this did, and the feedback that we got, was people felt more trust, felt more loyal to the project, had a deeper commitment, and it created a real bonding within the team. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on processing difficulty. With my coaching background, I developed a perspective that was adopted as part of the culture, where we started to perceive breakdowns or difficulties as potential breakthroughs and contributions to the organization. Something that might be in your blind spot or something to add value to the organization. So one of the things that I developed was a complaints policy, but I named it complaints to contributions. So welcoming tension or upsets in a healthy and constructive way meant that it could then be transmuted into a contribution to the organization and to the team. And it meant that we're not afraid of that we could see that that is something that can create benefit rather than be a problem. So yeah, that's me. It's quite quick, really. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of hone in on those particular subjects.
Thanks so much, Bex. Really, really appreciate you sharing that, and in particular talking about the aspect of bringing whole selves to meetings, asking for what we need so that we can be fully present. And you also kind of touched on the idea of like building trust, which is what enabled the kind of the welcoming of tensions and being able to process tensions So yeah, really great. Love the fact that, you know, we've covered quite a broad brushstroke of different aspects of meetings to help us hold them effectively and in different contexts too. I'm going to come back to you all with just a few questions, and you know, you can yeah, share what you can. Really, we're going to keep this section nice and tight. We've got about 15 minutes in total to ask questions and to go into a deeper level discussion. So to begin with, coming back to Guy, one of the, you know, first things that you mentioned was, you know, the small wins first. You know, and I really appreciated that. It's kind of about getting that momentum going. And you know, you spoke to the kind of the need to kind of feel that level of kind of a sense of success. But I wondered, how does that sit alongside what you were saying about consensus decision making? Because for anyone that's used consensus, it can be quite a lengthy process sometimes. Not necessarily when you get good at it, or the group gets really adept. But it does often contrast with this idea of kind of like quick wins. So could you talk a little bit about how you've managed to make consensus work for your group and also make it work for the meetings?
Yes, I do. Yeah, you've touched on it. Touched on it brilliantly. That is the main issue, and it's kind of taps into what Jeff was saying about finding people who are best at holding that well. It's not something to easily step into. There is a bit of like unlearning about how decision-making processes can be had. So it was a bit of a learning journey for us to make it work well. And part of that was time. On the point about those quick, easy wins at the start, so those would be the things that we call a report item, and I think Bex called it information. I think that's what, rather, information discussion decide. So the things which are just reporting back on something that's nice and short and snappy, but sweet, and a reminder of the things that have happened that get us, you know, remind us why we're doing what we're doing. Yeah, about consensus itself and how to do that. Well, I think it's reminding, to be fair, early on it would be just reminding people how that decision process works and trying to create examples of how it can be done. In land matters, when there are big things, when there are big topics that need making a decision on, we even made a decision that there's a discussion meeting, and then there's a week in between actually officially ratifying it. Now this doesn't work for, you know, everyone everywhere, but it gives space to allow that, you know, when things come up in the meeting, maybe not everyone's had a chance to put their voice in, and so we make a decision that we've come to at the end of that meeting, and then give a week for it to basically breathe and have people get clarifications and more chats in between then, and then officially make a ratifying it at the front of the meeting.
I can really see how that enables the space to kind of let things kind of percolate and settle. And for big decisions, maybe, I don't know, changing a group's name, or whether or not you're going to embark on a particular project or allocate funding to this thing in a big way, I can really see how that's a really useful strategy to use, and perhaps as well take some of the pressure out of the meeting in that moment as well, because there is that kind of potentially cooling off period or checking period that you're talking of. I've got another question I'd love to come back to you on. Let's see, we've got time, and there may be some questions from people who've joined us today as well. But I'm going to come to you, Jeff, next, if that's okay. And, you know, I really appreciated the way that you were, first of all, talking about a style of meeting, which I guess some people might call quite traditional. You think you use that word, or kind of like old school in terms of kind of these roles, these hierarchical roles, and then also kind of you know, the opportunity to have them in a more kind of horizontal sort of platform as well. You spoke about the difference between kind of like these, you know, group meetings and public meetings and the different qualities that you need. But one of the key things that you introduced was this idea of purpose. And I kind of liken it to the North Star, you know, what's the guiding principle about why we're here? And that should always inform anything that kind of comes up and anything that's emergent. But within all of that really juicy stuff, you spoke about holding a meeting whilst walking, or sitting on the grass. And that for me kind of made me think about the different ways we experience the world and how the world kind of influences our well-being. And part of the reason why we're in transition is because we care about the world and we want to you know, look after it so that it can look after us. So I just wondered if you could say anything else about those types of meetings that you hold that are a little bit more alternative, and the things that you might need to be aware of to make them work. Because obviously, when you're sitting out in the grass, you might not have a flip chart. That you spoke about electronic whiteboards and things like this. You know, is there anything that you have noticed that enables them to still be effective, even when you're kind of, you know, some resources down, so to speak?
I guess the first thing is the weather. That's the big issue with outdoor meetings. For instance, I go to a Pilates class, and on the 4th of July, our regular Pilates class is not going to be held because the room is being used as for the general election. So I suggested to the teacher, couldn't we do it outside on the grass? She points out real difficulties with that, both you know, the weather, but you've got to do risk assessments and so on. But for an informal meeting, that's probably informal meeting holding it outdoors. That's probably the biggest issue. What if it's raining? What if it's too hot? So it doesn't fit all formats. It doesn't fit.
I think that what you're talking about there, though, is you're coming back to this idea of kind of like care, you know, thinking about what people's needs are. You know, obviously, if it is too hot, you know, there's shade, and, you know, if it's raining, then it's not going to be appropriate. And, you know, I think that sometimes we can plow on with things that, you know, a system that's not working. But to introduce the idea that a meeting is possible outside, if that feels appropriate to people, and you can sit on the grass and you can get that grounding and you can get that, you know, nature connection, then that's a really wonderful tool. And I'm really, really glad that you mentioned it. Thank you for that. I'm going to come to you, Bex, if that's okay. I guess sort of building on that kind of care, you spoke a lot about, you know, making sure that people's needs were met, and a way of helping people land into the space by asking them kind of like, what do you need? And, you know, you alluded to the fact that that built not just trust, but also this level of commitment, which can be really difficult for transition groups. And it can be, you know, I guess quite a make or break thing. You know, building that group commitment is really, really important. In your experience, what other things have you noticed that support that commitment to meetings when they get difficult? Because that's something that we haven't necessarily dived into too much. I think we've mentioned a couple of suggestions, like obviously having a professional facilitator, getting training, stuff like that. But what is it in particular that gives people that attitude of, you know what, I'm in this, I can hold this difficulty with my fellow group members here?
Well, I suppose there was there was an invitation for people to express themselves freely and be held in that, so that there would, you know, people would welcome in the group wisdom. But I feel like there was sometimes some very different types of people and ways of working around the table, but we would coexist. We wanted to enliven coexistence and inclusivity and diversity. And that meant different opinions and different perspectives on things. And sometimes that tension was difficult because we might have people that were quite left in their thinking and other people that, you know, had a kind of an opposite view. So how do you hold that? And I think because the culture was so alive and trusted, the principles were lived out and embodied, even policies, rather than policing people, which a lot of policies can land as, they were written within a language that brought to life the commitment to those principles and ways of working. So there was a level of safety and trust that people then felt they could bring their whole selves, those parts of themselves which might not look like it fits in, or you might feel marginalized. I think there really was a sense that, and we would encourage those conversations and then look for solutions that found a middle way or a balance that would acknowledge enough of that person's need or perspective. And generally, we found that then the group wisdom and individuals really appreciated that. They appreciated that they could get that level of acknowledgement, and it would placate sometimes tensions immediately. Those feelings were acknowledged, and they were not just acknowledged verbally, but then they might be acted on.
Yeah, it sort of speaks to that idea that behind every behavior there's a need, really, and so coming back to that need again. And you've spoken about this in a way where it's a very kind of holistic space. Jeff introduced a different type of meeting style, which is kind of very businesslike and to kind of get through agendas and that kind of level of efficiency. And I think both are needed in different times. But to be able to build that culture is a word that we've heard a few times, actually. To build that culture is really, really important. I've got a couple more questions, but I just throw it open actually to Michael and Jane and anyone else. If you would like to ask a question or even offer a contribution about something that you find works well to help meetings stay effective and people engaged, then please, yes, raise your hand. Michael, have you got an offering for us? Please unmute if so.
Yes, sorry. Okay. I think an area that's caused me thought, listening to what's been said so far, is in the transition groups, we are tending to, as it were, favour a facilitator running a meeting rather than a chairman, because we are less hierarchical. And so in my role in our transition group, I'm kind of trying to be a chair, but in a facilitator direction. And I'd be interested to hear the comments of our presenters about that kind of the need to overlap and the tensions when you do try and overlap, because obviously if you go too far to the chair, you're becoming hierarchical. If you go too far to the facilitator direction, you might end up not getting anything done.
It's a great question, Michael. Love it. So passing it over to the panel, if any of you would like to respond to that, please just raise your hand and we'll pass to you. Any answers, solutions for Michael? Yeah, go for it, Jeff.
Only because nobody else raised their hand. So yeah, I've attended, even organised meetings, work meetings with both a chair and a facilitator. I think the important thing is that the chair and the facilitator talk beforehand, so that they both understand their roles and agree
Interesting. So you've had meetings where both are present at the same time.
Yes.
Not one with it. Oh, that's very interesting.
And I've just had meetings where for instance, I may be chairing it, but my role is very limited in that. It really is just announcing we're now on to the next point, which we're going to spend an hour on this, or we're going to spend 30 minutes on this, and then it's over to the facilitator to move things on. Now that might seem double manning, and it kind of was, but I wanted to be there, and I wanted to roll, so that's why I did it that way. But essentially, the meeting then becomes run by the not run by, but the facilitator is keeping the process flowing and making sure that people are understanding what's expected of them and so on. So yeah, you can do it, but if you have both, you really need to understand each other, I think.
I think you make a really interesting point. I think that's true for co-facilitation as well. When you have two facilitators, knowing how you're going to work together, how you're going to support each other. But I think that your idea and your experience speaks a lot to this transition that is happening within transition groups, where we have got quite a lot of groups that are more traditional in their makeup and in their process and practices, but younger people who've experienced more alternative formats are kind of coming through, and with a desire for things to be more horizontal. So having both roles simultaneously, with one person holding the order of things and keeping the agenda and responsibility of making sure that these things are kind of honoured, and the other person more around the kind of the flow is really interesting and a nice hybrid, and it might kind of help ease that kind of transition along. I love it. Just briefly, we've got a few minutes. If there is any other kind of questions or comments, please, this is the moment. Jane, just coming to you, just in case there's anything that you'd like to ask or share before we close.
I love what you're, sorry, I'll take that after. I love this idea of the chair and the facilitator, and probably that's kind of what we've been doing. And what you were saying about holding the tension between that space and moving things along, that is really, I find that really hard, really hard. But the issues that we have, often we do create that time to share, but then it's also a lot, it's things that we just can't, at the moment, we can't help with. And so it's just very frustrating, and it just, I don't know, gets into a bit of a, can easily get into a bit of a pity fest, really. It's, yeah, I don't know where we are at the moment. I don't think we're in a good place at the moment, to be honest. We're having major issues with transport. People just, basically, unless I'm taking people can't get there. And the get there had to be where we could actually find a space. So yeah, that was tricky. And we've got someone who has given us a space, so that's great, but it's getting people there. So
well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. And these are common problems. It's not just your group. And so I think that we can, collectively seek solutions. If you'd like to book in a support session with myself, we can perhaps hold a space to brainstorm some of those ideas about how to shift things. You're more than welcome to do that. I'll follow up this with an email, which will have a kind of a little link for you to be able to do that if you want. But thanks again, Jane, and for really naming that kind of, I guess, that more holistic and hybrid potential being of use. I'm going to just very quickly launch a little poll. I don't know whether or not as co-hosts you're able to complete this or not, so you may not see it, but hopefully everybody else will. There are 2 questions there. They should be pretty quick to answer if you can see it. I would really appreciate it if you could just fill that in whilst I kind of let you know kind of like what's happening next. At Transition Together, we have got a really incredible opportunity for people that would like to learn more about youth engagement and working with young people. We're partnering with an organization called LifeBeat. that is offering 2 transitioners space on their summer residential with 14 to 18-year-olds, a big staff team. So it'll be very supportive. And the opportunity is to engage young people on the theme and the issues of transition, and to really work with them to kind of hear about what they care about, what they would like to do, to run a workshop with them. And it's the expression of interest for that is open now, and I will share that in a follow-up email. Also, we have got some more Skillshares coming up over the next kind of couple of months. And we'd, obviously really love to have as many people in these sessions as possible, but they are available online. We'll make sure that the link is shared with you so that you can find it and able to kind of share it with your group if you think that it'll be of interest and use for them. The next one we've got coming up on the Wednesday, the 26th of June, is about establishing empowering governance. So really looking at governance structures. We've got some expertise coming to really talk about, what kind of company format or group format will really kind of support what it is you're seeking to do. The next one in July is going to be about harnessing creativity for change. So if your transition group has lost its pizzazz, how do we give it a creative boost or injection of imagination, and really bring things back to life and back to the core? So here are our results. So next steps, sharing information with the group. Try something that you heard tonight seemed to be what people are going to do, and that it was relevant, useful, and timing about right, which is good to hear. So 9:02, that is about right. We're going to hold it there. I just want to say one last thank you to our guest speakers this evening, and really for bringing your knowledge, for bringing your experience, and for engaging in this theme.